All right, good evening and welcome to the Westborough Advisory Finance Committee meeting, February 22nd, 2024, here at Town Hall. This is our 21st meeting of fiscal 2024. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted in person and via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body, as well as members of the public, may access this meeting in person or via virtual means. In-person attendance will be at the location here, as in the agenda. And it is possible that all the members of the public body may attend remotely, with in-person attendance consisting of members of the public. This meeting may be accessed remotely via the link in the agenda. When required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so by in-person attendance or by accessing the meeting remotely, as noted. Additionally, the meeting will be broadcast live in real time via Verizon Channel 28, Charter Channel 192, and via Westborough TV's online platforms at westboroughTV.org and youtube.com/WestboroughTV. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed by Westborough TV, and we, as always, thank them for their support. We're going to start off tonight with our guests from the Library Building Committee, Ed Baldwin, Chair, and Bob Petroselli, Vice Chair. And thanks for coming, and we'll start with your presentation.
Thank you. Well, I'm Ed Baldwin. As you all may have guessed, I'm the chair of the Library Building Committee and a library trustee. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to present this information about the library repair project. We're going to keep this short so that we have plenty of time for discussions and questions afterwards. But if you happen to have a question at any point, just ask. We can answer it right then and whatever. Also, there's a lot of weeds in these building projects, and if we get too far into those weeds, just say so, we'll start back up.
This group likes weeds, just for the fact. I don't think you could go too much into the mundane and details for this group. But I might be wrong, but judging.
We're kind of the in the weeds group.
Yes.
Okay, so before I really get into this, I want to acknowledge and thank the Library Building Committee. Our committee members have a wide range of expertise and knowledge, and they've brought a lot of insight to the project. They've all put a lot of time into the project to get it where it is now. I also want to thank our consultant partners, Lamoureux Pagano Associates Architects, the architect, and Vertex, the owner's project manager, for providing their expertise. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Bob for a minute to talk about the background and history of the project.
Thanks, Ed. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having us here this evening. I'm Bob Petroselli, 6 Francis Drive and Vice Chair of the Library Building Committee. And as most of you recall, the Library Building Committee provided an update on the progress of the schematic design at the October 16th town meeting. And at that point in time, we were working to document all the repairs and code requirements along with all the related costs. To identify the most urgent needs, the Library Building Committee broke the repairs into 4 different buckets or repair options, beginning with the lowest cost option 1, or base repair requirements at $12 million. The other 3 options, gathered from surveys and from public input, increase in order of magnitude from option 2, most requested repairs, and a medium priority program improvements, at $20 million, to option 2A, which included electrification and sustainable initiatives, and an all-above option 3 at $32 million, including low priority program improvements. Mindful of taxpayer sentiment, we fixated on the lowest cost option 1 at $12 million. However, a member of the public who attended many of our Zoom meetings throughout the year made an interesting suggestion for an option 1A, which would fall somewhere between options 1 and 2, and could include the base repairs along with some requested repairs that made good economic sense over the long term. So we reasoned that as long as some of the demo was taking place and the building was vacant, some of the long-term repairs could also be achieved in a cost-effective manner at around $16 million. So at this point, I'm going to turn the podium back over to Ed Baldwin, who will walk you through all the details of options 1A and our request for the 2024 town meeting and our projected estimate for the 2025 town meeting. Thank you.
So our overall goal for the repair project was to maintain the library facilities so that the library can continue to meet the needs of our residents. We broke that sort of overall objective down to 4 goals: cost effectiveness, essential maintenance, code compliance, and program improvements. I'm going to go through each of those in a little more detail. Cost effectiveness has been a constant and critical concern for the building committee right from day 0 on this part of the project. We've been trying to identify the most cost-effective ways to make the repairs, do the upgrades, do the program improvements, and considering both initial and lifetime costs throughout. Everybody on the committee is a taxpayer. We all want to get the best value for those taxes. So one of the drivers was the essential maintenance. The library, like any building, needs regular maintenance, and we've been putting off some of that maintenance for years because we were planning to do it as part of the renovation that got voted down in 2022. Some of those key items: one is restoration of the windows in the 1908 building. One is replacement of the roofs over the 1908 part of the building and the 1980 part. One is replacing selected components of the HVAC system. Some of them are failing or near their end of life, and we want to change those. And then finally, there's some old carpeting down in the children's room that needs to be gone. We're doing enough, that essential maintenance has enough cost to trigger requirements for compliance to the ADA and a bunch of other building codes. In your packet is a statement from the Library Building Committee on ADA compliance. We feel that it's essential and don't want to try and duck around it by splitting the cost around. And if we have questions about that, we, and particularly Bob, can discuss them after we finish, or even now if you'd like to get into that. But some of the requirements for ADA compliance are things like automatic door openers for the inside doors, new stair rails, and signage. There's numerous sort of inside the building things that need to be done. There's also, we may need to add a ramp and a wheelchair lift to the front of the library. That would be the most costly individual ADA item. And it's in the materials you saw, the cost estimates is alternate 1, and the estimated cost is $570,000. So we are reaching out to the appropriate boards and groups in town to decide whether that addition is needed and required. And I should say, we've included in the cost estimate because it might very well be required, and we want to go, if we're going to be wrong, we want to be wrong too high now, and come back and save the town money later. As another code thing, we're adding 3 restrooms on the main floor. In addition to being required by code, we've had patron requests for new and better restrooms for at least as long as I've been associated with the library. There's also requirements for multiple updates to all those codes, electrical energy, and so on. Finally, we're looking at some program improvements. Our focus is on repairs. It's a repair project, but we feel that while the library is closed, while we have the crews in there, while the walls and all are torn open, it makes sense to do some limited changes that will improve functionality of the library and make it more useful for the people in the town. And we've identified several of them. This is a list, but rather than walk through that list, I'm going to show you the things on some of our drawings. This is the main floor plan. Is there a pointer or a bullet or something I can use? Okay, actually, let me see.
There might be one.
Yeah, I'm trying to use the mouse. Oh, there it is. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the first one I want to mention is relocation of the teen room from the front. Right now, it's in the front of the library on either side as you walk in, and we've had a fair number of complaints about that. People like the quiet reading room area, so we're relocating that to the back of the library over here. And of course, that lets us restore these reading areas to their original purpose. We're converting one small area here into a study room. Right now, it's the room of things. As I mentioned, we're adding 3 family toilets, and we're adding a climate-controlled history storage area for the local history center. This is a look at the new teen area. We're looking here from the back of the library toward the front. These windows over on the right are facing the Congregational Church. And this wall and the window border on the main library. Having a wall in there will get acoustic separation. It'll prevent noise from the teen room from interfering with the main library and vice versa, which could also happen. I also want to point out this red structure here is called a nook. It's a portable meeting area. It's on wheels. You can roll it around. It provides some level of sound isolation and privacy for people who want to study or have a small group meeting. We're planning right now for one of them in the teen room and two of them out in the main, on the main floor. This is the concept of the quiet reading room. It looks pretty much the way it does now, except it's back to its purpose as an adult reading area, and we'll put better furniture into it. This is the lower floor. The biggest changes here is new carpeting in the children's room and the meeting room, new finishes in all the public areas. Let's see, I'm missing something. An upgrade to the meeting room's digital capabilities here. Right now it's just a room, but we'll have screened and something along these lines there. And we're putting a wall between the children's program area and the rest of the children's library again, for acoustic separation so you can have the program separately. Not much is happening on the top floor. The big thing is we're building an information technology closet rather than having, you've probably all seen the pictures of the tangle of cables in one corner that's going into the IT closet. It may still be a tangle, I don't know, I don't look at closets, but it'll be much more controlled. And I have to say, these drawings leave out many aspects of the project, roof repairs, infrastructure changes, the window replacement, but this is the sort of more visible things. So with all that said, I want to move on to the big question for the Finance Committee, which is how much will it cost? So this is a summary of where we are now. We've just finished the schematic design phase, and you're seeing some of the results of that. The town meeting, I forget what the right term is, allocated $360,000 for that last March. We're somewhat under budget for that right now. We're well under budget right now, but in 2 months when that phase is done, we'll be a little under budget. So if town meeting approves funding for the design development phase, that'll start in late March, early April. During design development, the architect and the OPM will work with us and other consultants and so on to create detailed construction plans. The two will be doing value engineering, which is trying to find ways to save cost while maintaining the functionality and the goals for the library. And then ultimately, sorry, my apologies, I'm jumping around on here. Ultimately, we are asking the architect and OPM to create bid packages for the construction phase, get those out so that we can have completed bids in time for the March 2025 town meeting. So if the town approves construction in 2025, we'll begin construction then. We've estimated a cost of $14.2 million for that. We're planning to have the bids in hand, so when that time comes, we'll have actual contracted costs to bring to town meeting. But the construction, assuming all this happens, the construction will take about a year. Library will reopen in 2026, and our estimate of the total project cost now is $16.2 million. And I should say that's everything related to the project. So moving temporary library, furniture, soft costs, and the various consultants and so on, it's all in there. This is just a graphical look at the timeline. And finally, this is the details for the 2024 funding request. This is what we're asking for in March. It's approximately $1.3 million for the design, for the architect and the project manager and their consultants. It's $170,000 for preparation for utilities, furniture planning, and things like that, and $125,000 to plan and prepare for the relocation. We want to have things set up so that if the town votes in favor of construction in 2025, we can start right then and not be wasting time and letting inflation happen and things like that. So that's all I've got. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we're happy to take any questions.
Okay. Questions? Start over here. Josh?
Can you talk a little bit about what was added as which were the select long-term repairs
Sure.
versus the high-priority program
the two
improvement and base
things-
repairs?
The big things were the roofs and the heating system.
Okay.
That sort of minimal thing that we did, scenario one, we just envisioned repairing the roofs to stop the leaks.
Yep.
But like the roof over the 1980 part of the building, that's a membrane roof. It's 40 years old. They have an expected life, I believe, of 25 to 35 years. So, and we've been getting big rainstorms. So the library is actually having leaks from that roof right now. And we felt that rather than paying somewhat less to Band-Aid it, we should just redo the whole thing, get a good roof that would last us for another 25, 30 years. And it's the same thing for the slate roof over the 1908 part of the building. That's a more expensive part because of the slate. And I should say that's one of the things we're looking at in terms of value engineering, is there may be less costly ways to do that. So that's one. The other is the HVAC system.
Yep.
We wanted to be careful about, be economically sensible about what we replace and what gets upgraded and what doesn't. I can tell you, we are planning to, it's a complicated thing. This is the weeds now.
Okay.
There's a gas-fired boiler that
Yep.
provides heat. There's a chiller that provides air conditioning. There's a couple of units on the roof. There's some air handling. There's all kinds of pumps and so it was pretty clear we've got 15 to 25 years left of life left on the gas-fired heater. So that's staying. The chiller has around 10 years, maybe a little less left in its expected lifetime. We're looking at replacing that with a heat pump that would shift, so that would give you both heating and cooling, and it would shift some of the energy away from gas and onto electric if we do that. And right now, the price we have here has sort of a large heat pump. It's actually overkill for the cooling phase, but it will handle almost all of the heating loads. So there's trade-offs we can do in there. We could put a smaller one. We could keep the existing chiller, and we haven't. That's part of the value engineering that we haven't done yet.
Yeah.
Then there's the things on the roof, and I've now run into the limits of my knowledge. Some of this stuff is 40 or more years old, and just flat out needs to be replaced. We have there's things, fan coil units that circulate air, and there's over a dozen of them. One of them caught fire 2 Decembers ago.
Yep.
So that one's an end of life.
Yep.
So those are the main things that we thought about. It was really, as I remember it, and I think Walter suggested a lot of these, looking at it and saying, okay, does it make sense to do a short-term fix when we can, over the life of the building, save money by doing a better permanent fix?
And of course, the concern was you're going to borrow, in theory, this money and do this whole project, and coming back 4 years later to do a roof, it just doesn't make sense, and then disrupt the whole thing. So
I would have hated to come back again for that.
don't want that. Rob?
Yep. Thank you.
Yes, so, and thank Ed and the building committee. They've been very open, sharing information. Ed gets back to me within a couple of days whenever I have a question, so certainly appreciate it. The one thing, in terms of the article itself, I had questioned was the fees for the CM and the architect. And, in proportion to the size of the project, they seem high. And, I wonder what you do, as a building committee to kind of evaluate those costs and determine if they're reasonable or not.
Okay. I have actually been checking with Shab Khan, the town procurement officer, to see what her experience and other towns' experience is on that. And, this is very rough. We haven't gone into any details. There's exceptions in every case. But what she came back is lower than the numbers we have here that we got from our consultants. For the OPM, I will say this the big part of their construction budget is they have somebody on site full-time throughout the construction phase. And that's true whether it's a little project, which this, and the scale of municipal projects is a relatively small project, and they have a big project. So like for Fales, which was about $70 million, I believe, they had somebody on site the whole project. For this, which is $15 million, somebody on site the whole project. As a percentage, we're going to be higher because of that. I'm not sure whether that would account for the whole difference that you've mentioned, but that made a lot of sense to me as part of the reason. That said, the estimates are their estimates. We haven't started negotiations with them, and we will be keeping your comments and the information from Ms. Khan in mind when we start that.
Appreciate that. And then the other thing, just in terms of, some of the more minor professional services that are in your breakdown, $30,000 for a traffic study, $30,000 for acoustical design, $25,000 for independent review, $40,000 for FF&E coordinator. I'm wondering when the decision will be made in terms of, I realize they're placeholders if you need them, but when will you kind of figure that all out?
To confirm, yes, there are definitely placeholders, and my understanding is that we would be looking at it and decide whether or not we needed them if and as things came up. And the sort of the most clear cut is the hazmat coordinator. If we dig into something and find asbestos, then we have to have a hazmat coordinator. If we don't find anything nasty, which in a 1908 building is unlikely, but then we don't need a hazmat coordinator. So the traffic study, I don't know offhand, but I think the town has some relatively recent traffic studies, so that may or may not be necessary. It's something we'll be looking at, because each of those are a relatively small piece of cash compared to the project, but you add them up, and soon it adds up.
Okay. And then the last question I had was just, in terms of when and how do you decide whether you're going to need the front stairs or not? Is that something we can find out right away before you go through a design?
We have a preliminary design. I think right away, not in time for the town meeting, for sure.
No.
We plan to look into getting a variance for that. So that would require working with the building inspector and whatever infrastructure they have for evaluating ADA compliance. We also want to reach out to the disabled community in Westborough and just start getting some feedback on how useful that would be. Just my personal take on it right now is there's pretty clear disadvantages. $500,000 cost is a disadvantage. It would not be good for the aesthetics or the historicity of the front of the building. If you're familiar with the building, you walk up and you go in and there's these two sweeping staircases, the 1908 staircases going up. This one would go away and be replaced by a chairlift. So it's not pretty. But in my mind, so we know the problems with doing it, but what I don't understand is how much not having a ramp would affect the community of disabled persons and people with disabilities in Westborough. And we need to get a read on that. If it's going to be a major problem, we need to weigh the problems that would cause to our residents with disabilities against that cost. And we haven't done that yet. We need to do the outreach, and ultimately we'll either get a variance or not. I don't have a timeline for that, except it will certainly be before we come back in 2025.
Yeah, no, I guess my only point is if you could find it out sooner, then you could save the design cost of having to go through the whole design.
Right. Yeah, we have a preliminary design for it now, and I don't know what the building committee what the building inspector would want in terms of the design, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sooner is always better in these things.
My understanding too is the actual handicap parking spots are next to the side door, not to the front. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
Although, it occurs literally just at this moment. We could put a curb cut right in front of the library, and that might ease some of that. I'm not sure what the restrictions are for parallel parking versus, head-in parking.
Jane?
So my only question, just sort of general looking, so you had mentioned one of the improvements is replacing the the air conditioning system with a heat pump, which is more efficient. For the rest of the repair and replacement, is it all sort of same quality, right? Or are we looking at energy efficiency upgrades?
We
Are
are
we
looking at
looking at-
energy efficiency upgrades. I didn't go into this because I don't fully understand it, but I know there's, I think it's a exhaust recovery ventilator on the roof, and that's being, right now it's passive. The idea is that, you have to be exchanging air so that you get some fresh air into the building. And you want to not just suck the cold air into the building and pour out the hot air if it's winter. So this actually heats up the incoming air by cooling off the outgoing. So right now it's just passive, as I understand it. It goes both ways. The current proposal envisions putting essentially a heat pump in there to do that transfer more efficiently.
Okay.
That's, if you're interested, I can go digging or call our HVAC consultant and find out more about that.
We're probably beyond my skill set
I
anyway.
know it's
Mine was
beyond
really just
mine,
more
so-
of a general, right, as we're replacing lights, are we going with LED fixtures?
Yeah.
That sort of, are we taking this opportunity to make those sort of efficiency upgrades?
We're making some. We looked at the efficiency upgrade that would bring us into full compliance with the stretch energy code. And that would have required adding insulation to the whole building, redoing all the windows, going to pretty much all electric HVAC. And that was option 2A, which cost $28 million. And that,
So big price
we didn't have to go think too hard about that, so.
Okay. Okay. That's all I have.
Okay. Andrew?
Sure. A question and an observation. The question is about the quiet reading room, which sort of perplexes me in this regard. When we were talking about the new library, all the additional space, one of the driving motivators, as I understood it, is bigger town, more people, a lot more people using resources, a lot more activity, a lot more need for things. How, is it feedback from other people that made you say, yes, we have this need for being able to use this space as best we can. Let's carve out an entire room for a half dozen people in cushy chairs to read, or some, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but that seems like a lot of real estate for what seems like a very small thing when there was such a pressing need for program space prior.
We have, in fact, received some pretty vociferous complaints about losing those two areas to the teen room. Some of our patrons really, our older patrons, I think, really like having those rooms as quiet places to read. But you do raise a good point, and there's, we can certainly talk about other ways to use maybe one of those rooms, have one quiet reading room and one something else. I think, I would guarantee to talk about it.
Well, and it's wrong for me to target just the quiet reading room per se. This is not entirely unlike the community center. We're getting a lot of feedback for the things that are most important. And maybe the best way to couch it is, did the quiet area rank so sufficiently high as to supplant other things that we would have liked to have done with the space? And you community would have known best based upon your feedback.
Let me bring that back to the building committee and actually to the trustees.
Okay.
And we could, the library director, Maureen Emerson, she's on vacation, so.
Fair enough.
But, that is a very good point, and it is a considerable amount of space, so.
So just to point out, though, that someone thought it was so important that they've created a citizen's petition at the end of this warrant
Yeah.
to somehow have town meeting have an opinion on something the library trustees and
I saw the
the library
teen
staff should
room.
probably have the opinion on. But
They
they
would
want,
turn the
they
teen
they
room
wanted
back.
to return that space from, and as you can see, it's in the plan currently anyway, so I don't fully understand it, but it certainly points to the passion on the topic.
I
That was my only point.
So I think it's worth noting too, so the original plan where we were talking about more community space, more meeting space, that sort of stuff, was prior to purchasing the community center. And so I am not surprised to be a shift in how we're utilizing space based on an additional resource that we'll have in the future that we wouldn't have had in the first version of what should the library look like.
Which brings me to my second point. My first point,
There
because
you
the first
go.
one was a question. Thank you for the segue.
Teed it up for you.
Go ahead.
So the community center offers a couple of interesting things, in as much as it is bringing constituencies together that I know support the library, and I think presents an opportunity that I think the library should think about how it can advance. So, by example, the senior center is going to be there. They're doing there are a lot of folks who are going to be using the accessibility needs. They're going to be the folks who may want the quiet room. They'll have a packet of needs that could be served by the library, but maybe in a small satellite way, you could meet Pareto's 80% with just 20% of something there. Ditto with the folks who are going to be there for community activities for the kids and stuff like that. So I would want the library to be really active in terms of thinking about what are the opportunities for a small footprint to deal with significant elements that would take traffic potentially, and I don't want to say take it away from the library, but would bring the library services to the people instead of having them to go where there's already challenges parking, there may be other things going on. And it's an observation, and so I'm comfortable if you don't have any feedback for that.
We've actually had discussions along those lines. I'm putting words in Maureen's mouth now, so you can take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But in general, she doesn't like the idea of satellite libraries because of the staffing requirements. Having a permanent staffing library there, I think you'd have to have two librarians there at all times. It makes things much more expensive and much more complicated. On the other hand, the library already reaches out to a lot of large facilities in town. The Arrive, the two elderly housing places and things. Their librarians go out there every couple of weeks, or maybe every week, I don't know exactly, with books and allow people to check things out. They put on programs and so on. I think it would make a lot of sense to have sort of a regular library activity, book checking out, whatever thing, at the community center. And I suspect that the library trustees and staff would be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation's blurring lines between what the building committee, I mean, you're a trustee, so you're both, but
Yeah.
a lot of the programmatic things are not under the charge of the building committee per se, because it's the trustees who should
But
decide
speaking as
that.
a trustee, I will certainly bring that back
Exactly.
to the trustees.
We do have several trustees on that.
Yeah, there's several.
I trust you will.
So my question is, I guess the current number that you showed at the top now incorporates not getting or not doing a waiver on the stairwell. That's the 16.2 at the moment.
16.2, that includes the ramp and the stair lift and
Okay.
everything.
So if
If
the
we were
stair were not done, which is about
$550,000.
$550,000
That
of
would bring it down
construction
to
costs, would that
15.5 or so.
also potentially reduce, when we're talking about
Actually,
negotiating
come to think, yeah, it would reduce.
the fees? and
I should say
everything like
the 500,000 is the construction cost.
that? Right,
And that's, I don't have this number in memory, it's 50 to 60% of the total project cost. And it would probably, so it could be a very substantial reduction in the total
Okay.
project cost.
and the intention is to bring to a year from now, town meeting, detailed costs based on the quote. So we're going to get the design from the sort of 10% phase to the full. I mean, you have drawings.
Yeah,
and-
I think
and
it's
plans.
considerably more than 10%
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
I've looked at the drawings, I've looked at the estimate. If that's only 10% of the detail, we're gonna need fork trucks to move around the final plan.
Okay.
But yes, that's correct. If, when we come back to town meeting in 2025, our plan is to know exactly what we're doing. We'll know whether the ramp is there or not. We'll know, what we're doing for the chiller. We'll know whether we found any value engineering for the roof, all that, and we'll have the cost.
Very good. Prashant is actually joining us from about as far away on Earth as you could be. And I just want to see if he has any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Walter. Okay. So I think my only question was, so now that schematic design is completed, and I was just going through a few other libraries that have also gone through similar projects. Is there any kind of capital campaign or any kind of, grants or fundings that we have explored, which could possibly help us reduce the cost for this, before we go to the next phase of design? Is that something that we have considered at hand?
Yes, there is. There is a Westborough Library Foundation whose purpose is to help with these capital campaigns. They have not been very active. They wanted to, as a policy, they like to see the approval happen so that they're not raising money for something that doesn't occur. So they were sort of ramping up to raise money for furniture for the previous renovation proposal, and that didn't happen. But they're out there, and I don't know where they are in terms of fundraising at this point, but we are working on that. I know for the previous version, we were hoping that they would raise funds to support a lot of the furniture purchases.
So eventually, will that still be explored, or that is something which we have done, but we just couldn't get that?
We'll definitely be exploring it
Appropriate.
for this version as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's what I had, Walter.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I think that part of the ability to fundraise is dependent on, one, having at least the concept up to the point where you have it now, and probably having at least town meeting approval on this next phase, because
Yeah.
it makes a better fundraising case that you could contribute to the furniture or something.
If I may, one more question, and I'm thinking now about the access. The notion of the ramp that goes up that we've talked about that's very disruptive, is the goal to get a ramp through the front of the building, or is the ultimate goal really to allow people with a disability to get into the building? And if that is the case, why is the front of the building the focus of that ramp?
People with disabilities can already get into the building through the Perkins Street entrance, and that's not going to change.
Okay.
It's going to be improved because you have better
Well,
door opening.
It'll be
and things.
improved, but that access will be there regardless of what happens in the front door. We know from other projects, they've had, historical buildings have this situation all the time, and some of them get a variance and some of them don't. And we just don't know. So that's what we have to explore probably in the next 6 months. It's my guess we'll have an answer, because we'll need that to finish the designs.
Is what's going to drive this, though, a code requirement that people with disabilities have multiple points of access?
It has to be the
The
front.
main, has to be the main
The
entrance.
main entrance has to be the accessible entrance, and
if
so
the-
we're going to ask for a waiver
If
of
the doors-
that particular.
If the
So it
doors
is a
were
code thing.
swapped, then it wouldn't probably matter, but
How much would it cost to change the main entrance?
The Perkins Street,
Maybe change the
Less-
sidewalk and a new sign and call that the front.
yeah, the Perkins Street, functionally, I think it is the main entrance. That's where most people go in and out.
Yeah.
But for the parking next to the Forbes building is right across from it. So I think we have a good argument that is the main entrance, but ultimately it won't be us that decides that. It'll be I think the building inspector and whoever in the town is involved with the ADA decisions.
You can lay down some little tickers that track the number of people that come in through each door, if you think that there's a case to be made there. But
That's,
food for thought.
I know the library tracks how many people come in. I don't know if they do it by door, but we can find that out.
It's a $500,000 question.
Could be.
At the moment.
Very well be.
Anyhow.
Okay, yeah, I suspect the decision isn't up to us. Right.
I actually think it's a state waiver you have to get, because
Yeah.
it is, to strictly meet the code, you have to have it. And I don't think it's just the front door. I think it's any main access to the building.
Yeah.
I think my only caveat is, continue, as you said, Ed, to value engineer. There's a lot of projects going in town for competing monies, and, the more you can bring I realize there's a lot of placeholders and you need to be conservative at this point, but I would say, don't let off the gas here, keep pushing the engineers and architects to, come up with the value engineering and make good decisions. And my only caveat is, as we're getting into some of these more energy efficient heating systems, they don't necessarily work as well as people say they do, and they cost a lot of money, and I would make sure that we all understand and feel comfortable with that direction and what the costs associated with them, because the payback on some of those things is not where you would think it would be.
One of the conclusions that we actually had a full meeting on the HVAC system, and one of the conclusions that came out of it was that the economics, the long-term operating costs for gas versus electricity, there might be no difference, and there was really no way to tell over the next 20 years. Nobody knows what gas and electrical prices are going to do. So we're not just, so I say blindly saying, oh, electric is good. We want to think very carefully about that.
Okay, any further questions? If not, I think we could do a vote. You want to make a motion, Gene?
Yeah, is this still,
It's 12C.
it's 12, yeah,
Oh, the number?
but is it still an appropriate, borrow, or transfer
It's a
from available?
borrow.
So it's a borrow?
It's a borrow.
Okay.
So our motion would be to recommend the town borrow.
Do we want to talk about that, Rod?
Was that borrow versus something else?
That's,
I mean,
I would like it.
I'll
to
make the
come-
motion,
I'd
yeah,
like
yeah.
the money to come falling out of the sky, but that's probably not
Well-
something town meeting can vote for.
I second that.
All right.
But the number is
McMahon?
correct in the market.
I make a
It's margin.
motion to recommend to the town to vote to approve the town borrow $1,603,852 to fund.
603 or 604?
Yeah, I think
603 is what's currently in,
I think that was in the information packet we sent out, and there was a typo in there.
All right, is the warrant correct or the?
It's now 1604.
So we are voting for the
Okay.
1604.
All right, so let's do 1604.
$1,604,852 for the design of the Westborough Public Library building improvements.
Bradley, second.
All right, just hold on, let me catch up. That's McMahon and Bradley. Any further discussion? Prashant, you're up first.
Ahuja, yes.
Bradley, yes.
Brant, yes.
Clap, yes.
Dolan, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Shafford, yes.
Okay, we have 800 with 8 present. And we thank you guys for coming and
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Do I just unplug this, or?
yeah, see what happens.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
We might go off the air for all I
If it
know,
explodes,
but,
I'm going to be upset.
you gotta be brave. Okay, Blumberg is not here. Clapp is- Thank you very much. Give you a minute to get out of here.
Do we want to make any comments or any notes while we're sort of on the topic?
Good idea, Jane.
Sure, anybody have suggestions of why you're in favor of this?
So I was pretty reluctant the last time around. This one I think was I think that they clearly heard the message. They came in with, I think, a reasonable price point. They're taking advantage of the opportunity to make some upgrades that are going to be needed in the near future, so we're not back having this conversation the way you said, Walter, 4 years from now. I mean, I think that it was really a reasonable compromise in accomplishing the things that are needed without an overly large price tag.
I also like the fact that the price tag was relatively conservative, and there were some placeholders there that erred on the conservative side.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to see is have to come back for even more.
Any others? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. I think we have a few projects which are simultaneously going on right at the moment. Like for example, the roof redesign for the schools. as well as this particular project is also going through the roof design as well. So I feel there's a lot of scope of efficiency there, and maybe, you know, after the town meeting or articles, we should be thinking about how all of these can operate, learning off each other versus operating separately. Which can actually help in reducing the cost. So that was my only comment. Yeah.
Thanks, Prashant. Okay, we have a few other sort of town meeting cleanup and stuff like that. I've also invited our interim finance director, John Steinberg, to come up and help us through a few things as well. While John's coming up here, I just thought I would start with one of them. We had a question. We've gone through there were 3 vehicles that were being bought, and we got the DPW information, and certainly we'll get more on that maybe next week. Beth provided the information from the health department. I reached out to Fred Leonardo on the community development, and so I have information to share on that. There are actually 2 vehicles they are attempting to replace, the idea being one this year and hopefully one next year. Both vehicles are used within the department for daily inspections. One is for electrical building inspection, the other for conservation. Both vehicles have to be capable of driving off paved roadways and occasionally in bad weather. For those reasons, we are looking at all-wheel or four-wheel drive vehicles. The replacements are for 2 old police interceptors. Both are 2016. One has approximately 150,000 miles, and he believed the other one is in excess of 90,000 miles, but he's going to get a better estimate, but I'm not sure I need one. Both vehicles continue to need costly repairs, so if approved this year, it'll be up to the town's mechanic to determine which of these 2 vehicles should be replaced first, and hopefully that addresses our question. Does it? On the cars? Okay. And the second thing that I asked the building commissioner, because there's an article on changing the bylaw of which has to do with the community development director not necessarily being the building commissioner. So I asked curious if the affected department is supportive of this suggested change, because we didn't have that information. And he says the other change for dropping the building commissioner title is okay with the department. The intent is for succession planning to make the transition easier within the town from the community development director position and building commissioner, and not necessarily having to do both jobs and clarify responsibilities. So, okay. So I think that one probably we can vote to. Okay, John, now that you're up here. There are a couple topics that we had some questions on.
Sure, John Steinberg, Chief Assessor and Interim Finance Director. How are you?
Very good.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us.
Where do you want to start?
Let's start with, I believe there were questions on why some articles are articles and not in budgets.
Sure.
Specifically, I recall fish.
The fish conversation.
We spent a lot of time on
the
fish
fish and
so far
hazardous
this
waste
year.
are great standouts for this. And I think the answer with regards to the rec department that operates on a revolving account, the programming generally funds itself through the revolving account. There is no return to the fund from the fish. So it becomes somewhat discretionary for the town. And when they first brought it out of the budget, the discussion was give the town the opportunity to vote as a whole rather than something that is more operationally built into the budget and into the programming as a discretionary item. And that's going back in history when it was taken out of the rec department, where it doesn't contribute to the revolving account in any way. It doesn't extract from the revolving account. It would just be a line item expense. Hazardous waste day was also discussed in the same sense. I know that for a long time they did one of them. They started to do 2 again, and I met with Jen, and we talked about the fact that they were going to put it out there. They're sort of at the cusp of what they need for money if they do 2, and sort of play it by ear and go back to the 1 based upon participation. But again, by taking it out of their operational budget, it becomes discretionary to the town as to how much they want to participate and invest in that type of thing. So many people do buy dump passes and can dispose of their hazardous waste through their own expense versus going through the town as a whole. So that's part of historically how things have been looked at in that regard. Things that are not operationally expedient and something that's going to be a recurring cost. Some things are in budgets because they happen every year, but that doesn't necessarily make them integral to the operations or services of a department.
So the majority of the rec programs, they charge fees and they pay for themselves.
Correct.
Whereas the block party is truly
Right, the block party is
an
another good one,
expense.
July 4th.
We don't.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't pay for itself.
And they do look to fund other things that are more broadly enjoyed, not only through support by community businesses like the Trick or Treat, which is enjoyed by so many, and are sort of newer programs, but don't require a lot of funding and are supported by the community businesses that surround.
Excellent. Any other questions on that particular topic? Okay. We will eventually get to the article on the senior work-off, but I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the free cash and why we make estimates on revenue
Sure.
now versus later.
Sure. As Rod so eloquently put, free cash certainly is not free. One thing to emphasize about the source of free cash, and I know it's been discussed before, but the most of the free cash comes from other revenue sources. It's not from monies that are raised by property taxes and not spent, although if we don't need the money, we hope that departments will turn it back and not spend it. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's not needed the next year. It's that hopefully they're not spending it for the sake of spending it. I think that we have a good team of department heads that spend wisely and put programs in place when they're appropriate in any given year, looking at what the circumstances are surrounding it. We've been very fortuitous in the past years to have some big one-time windfalls in each year, to the tune of well over 6 figures each year, and in some years multiples of those. And so the thing about relying on free cash is that you never know if it's going to be there next year. Again, we've been fortunate, and many communities are not, that we are able to replenish our free cash. Good fiscal policy is that you use your free cash to give back to the taxpayers in a way, because it is a reserve, by paying for one-time expenditures without having to raise those through property taxes. If you need to replace a vehicle, you're now not putting that burden on the broader tax base because you can use your reserves for it that you have been so fortunate to be able to replenish. And that's one of the key responsible uses of free cash. And as we start to, our debt continues to grow, it was a conversation recently in our S&P call about how we use our reserves to try to slow down that debt burden that we continue to grow. As long as we have the free cash, using it wisely to avoid that operational deficit. The money that we use simply to lower the tax rate with operational expenses, those expenses are going to be there in future years. And so if that one-time fund goes away, then all of a sudden you have to pick up that operational expense on top of anything else. So it's really important to try to focus as much as you can on dwindling your dependence on that free cash to lower the tax rate and find other ways to reduce the burden of taxes through spending that money wisely. Does that answer the question?
It does for me.
So,
But
you know,
you're welcome
I
to
guess
comment.
I'm the free cash guy, and so what my perception is that, you know, we are very conservative in terms of what we expect to receive in revenue, and subsequently we end up having the taxpayers pay more than they perhaps should, and we end up with this bucket of money. Granted, there's some one-time things, but I mean, it's pretty significant amount of money that we have in free cash. And then I see things that perhaps should be in a department budget, they're now getting paid by free cash. So in some ways.
Like what?
What's that?
Like what?
You just talked about the fish, the recreation.
Why would the fish be in the budget, though? That's my question.
What's that?
You said it should be in the department budget. Why would it be in the department budget?
Because could be a recreational cost that comes up every year. I mean, I think it's a waste of time for the town to be voting on $4,000 a fish every year for something that gets approved. So if it's that important, just put it in the budget and have it there every year. I think I see more and more that, we had IT coming $19,000 this year we're going to pay for in free cash.
That's actually a great example, because that is a one-time purchase. That's not a recurring item. Should never have been in the budget. It's a great example of something that should be used for free cash for a one-time purchase. I understand what you're saying, and we discussed this, excuse me, I don't mean to cut you off, but we discussed this at the budget summit. We are very conservative in our estimates, but those change through the year as we get more information. If you go back in time and you look at where those surpluses come from and which line items they come out of, right? You want to look at that and say, well, why is that, right? Did our hotel and motel taxes come back faster than we were expecting after COVID? The answer is no, but the meals tax did, right? We weren't expecting the meals tax, but we can't rely on that. The ambulance tax, we had a spike of $2 million that one year, but what we do is we look at multiple years going backwards. And that $2 million spike, I pulled it before I came up here, on one of these pages. Was exactly that. It was 1.6 million, 1.65, 1.76, 1.61, 1.67, 2 million, and now we're estimating 1.65. Sounds like a pretty sound estimate to me if you look back at a 5-year picture.
I think if you ask the chief, he could be pretty well sure that we're going to get $2 million again.
Yeah, well, we've only gotten to $2 million once ever.
But we've
But-
also,
but the-
and this isn't a debate.
Well, no,
Right, but
the,
you
the
see my
other,
point?
the
I
other
mean-
aspect of it is the tax rate is set in October.
Right, so
your
we'll evolve
estimate
that.
today of that doesn't change the tax. rate
So
at
our
all
motel,
yet.
our
It's
meals,
what the
our meals
estimate will be
tax,
at-
for example, we get them in 4 payments.
Yeah.
When we make the estimates initially, we haven't received any payments yet.
Well, we're talking about fiscal '25, so we.
Right, that's
you
what I'm
couldn't-
saying,
okay.
but we haven't received any payments for '24.
Yeah.
When we're making the estimates for '25.
But what was it for '23?
The meals tax?
Yeah.
The meals tax for '23 was 780. And before that, it was 663, 517, 632, 700, 673, so we're at 700. So we do trends. We look for the trends to be conservative, so then when October comes around, we will have just gotten our 3rd payment. And after 3 payments of 24, we'll have a better picture for what's coming for 25. So we'll do the same thing with ambulance receipts. We'll get our update on where we are with our ambulance receipt billing. I was just sitting back there doing our first excise commitment for 2024, right? And so now I can see, up until this point in 2024, I mean, we didn't have our big excise commitment. I'm committing, over $2 million worth of excise right there, right? I looked at it compared to last year. It's $100,000 more than last year, so I can already start my trend and track for the future adjustments. It's our goal to make those estimates as strong as they can be. Okay, it's our goal to keep the tax impact as low as we can, but we have to do it with conservatism, because if something happens like the governor comes out lower than our 2.5% projection, it hurts. And so we have to be conservative, and when things look bleak like they did during COVID, we have to adjust our estimates backwards. I have a good friend who's in the auto industry. And I can't tell you how many times I speak to him over the course of the year to find out what's going on with inventory, what's going on with prices, and where sales are going to be for the next year. And it served us very well during COVID, because towns saw a big drop, but we were able to adapt to that because we're looking for that type of inside information, if you will, to best reflect it to the taxpayers. But yeah, I agree with you. We are conservative, but I think wisely conservative.
Well, I guess then the next step is, and so for 2023, what was our free cash? What was, how much do we have in free cash?
14.1, I think it was 14.5, give or take, million.
No,
14.
just raised from 23. In other
Oh,
words,
I don't know off the top of my head, because I'd have to look at the net,
Yeah,
you know, from what we spend to where we are net.
so say it was $4 million.
Oh, no, it's probably more like $1.5 million. You know, because we spend $1 million, then we're up another 500,000, so you're net, you know.
So the quick calculation I did, and this was with the reserves, this water and sewer reserves, it looked like it was over $4 million. So, I mean, I'd be glad to look at it. So my question is, you know, we're talking about a structural deficit and, you know, being able to pay for things, which is great. But we also have tax increases that are going to go up by $1,000. So talk about a structural deficit. There's a structural deficit for our taxpayers. And what I'm saying is there's free cash left over at the end of the year. We should be giving more of it back to the taxpayers.
In what way, I guess would be my question.
What way give it back?
What way would you give it back?
So instead of the $450,000 that's proposed this year, make it $1 million.
Okay, that's one way to look at it. Yes, Gene.
So,
Sorry, I
so
should be calling
no,
you.
that's okay.
what- Chair.
So I understand that does create a structural deficit because that's ongoing expense. But, so the library building repair design that we just voted on, that's gonna be a borrow, why isn't that free cash? I mean, the borrow's gonna be, you know, increased, tax burden, both on the principal and the interest over time. If we're looking to reduce, or if we think our free cash is a little high,
Right, so-
that seems like that would be a perfectly good,
I don't
way
disagree.
to-
I happen to agree with you,
And-
and we actually, you'll see that we moved 2 of the design articles from borrows to free cash.
Yeah.
So the
So
tune of
that's a
about
good way
almost
to reduce-
$700,000.
Right.
So, and last year, I think it was, we spent 1.1 million for a project out
Yep.
of free cash.
Yep.
So I think somewhere there's a line where you're
Right.
eating too far into your reserves.
right,
Or spending wisely in your reserves.
right. So the real question is, where's that line?
Right.
I think
Where's
certainly
that
a
line?
project like that makes more sense than
Ongoing
$4,500
budget.
in fish that I
Right.
would agree should be a budget item. Right, I mean, it's a small enough dollar amount and it is a normal annual operating expense. I don't know why you wouldn't build it into your budget. And I think you're right though, so I agree, I'm an accountant and I will wholeheartedly agree with John. We need to be conservative in our revenue estimates.
Yep.
Because the worst case scenario is we overestimate revenue and we cannot meet our obligations. That is the absolute worst case scenario. So you have to be conservative. But so then if our standard practice is to say, okay, last year we exceeded our revenue by $1.6 million. And look, we have this design that's going on the warrant for 1.4. That's a good way to offset that. We know we don't raise our tax further next year. We don't continue to inflate that free cash dollar amount. And we also don't pay the cost of borrowing.
Yep.
Right, so that cost of borrowing is doubling your expense. Right, and so if you, I mean, so I agree with the point. I also agree with John though, like we can't just
Well,
guess
for-
we're gonna make a bunch of money and hope for the best.
And as
Hope you make it next year.
Right.
well, as John pointed out, now the $192,000 Wing C roof design and the $504,000 wing roof replace design in the high school are both being paid for free cash. So that's another $696,000 that's not a borrow, it's a,
Right.
it's a thing.
I would be interested, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to see what that dollar amount was for last year, right, what that changes versus what we're suggesting out of free cash this year, right? So are we really matching those up to some extent? I mean, I know the goal is to maintain some level of free cash, certainly we don't, but I'd be curious to see how well those line up.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a year to year. I think it would be interesting to do a year
Yeah.
to year with the net spend.
Right.
Absolutely numbers that are good to look at, as well as I think worthwhile to look at what categories the free cash
Yeah.
lump is coming from each year. Is it something like the meals tax, which was surprisingly high? one year versus another,
That would
or,
be interesting. Are they consistently in one
Right,
area
one
or
area
certain
or another.
types of areas
Yeah.
even, right? Where can we identify some sort of trends in where those are, or are they really sort of arbitrary and every year is different and that's just going to be the world we live in?
yeah,
I
and
think it would be
sometimes,
interesting
you
to
know, the
see.
one, like permits, for example, permits is one that we watch closely because we've been very fortunate with some of the development that's gone on here, but it's very cyclical with permits as to when they get paid for versus when they get built and what's coming down the pipeline. And so we talked to Fred, you know, I can't estimate permits in a vacuum. So it's important that we reach out to the people who are in those departments and get the feedback as to what's going on and what they see and discuss it with them, what they see on the horizon, so that we're doing it from an educated standpoint and not doing it in a vacuum. I will say this as well, by the way, just
Yeah.
as one last thing in regards to the ratings call recently, is it was one of the questions that they asked, is how we balance that. Because, you know, it's, when we tell them what's on the horizon, and the list includes the roofs, the library, and, you know,
Community center.
yeah, and they're repair projects, you know, these are not necessarily wholly and entirely discretionary. You gotta fix the roof, and those are big numbers. And so that raises an eyebrow, and at some point, you know, we've stood here for a few years as this has gone on, and at some point, they're gonna, you know, not take it as well. You know, we're very fortunate in that we have such a strong economic base from both the residential and commercial industrial growth. And I hope that that continues.
So I don't mean to dominate. One question I had for Walter that we couldn't figure out was the percentage. When you're calculating the percentage of free cash and reserve, it's over what amount? In other words, when we say we have, whatever, 10% or 5% free cash over,
To the operating budget.
yeah, we couldn't get those numbers to work.
Right,
I
we're
didn't
off.
get him to work either, to be fair.
Yeah,
and
so it's interesting. So I didn't get a chance to get back to it, but
tried to tie him out.
Well, he did ask the question, but he's been,
yeah, I haven't, well, Chris and I
Understaffed so
talked
far.
about it because those two numbers were from two different places
Yeah.
when we were putting them together. And so somewhere there is a net, and it's on a sticky note right on my monitor.
so we are planning on still getting to that at
Yes.
some point.
Use whichever one you want.
Okay, one
They
more-
both work, by the way. They both keep you in that range, I think.
Well, that's what I tried to tie it out, and the number, I mean, it was in the reasonable range, but it wasn't
It wasn't the
what-
same number
It
when you
wasn't
add
the
them up.
same,
yeah.
right? When I did the math, I got somewhere in the target range, but when I did the math, I did not get the number that was on, it must have been in our budget book, is where I was looking at it.
Yeah,
But,
no, I think it to me was a question of whether the reserves were included, whether the enterprise funds were included in the calculation or not,
For the operating, yeah, I don't know.
which they probably shouldn't be. Right?
Shouldn't be,
Right.
correct.
Okay. One other question while you're here. We would like, because there's Article 26 on the warrant, with your other hat as being assessor, the accept Mass General Law, Chapter 59, 5-5K Senior Tax Work-Off is an article that
Sure, I'll
we'd
give-
like a little more information.
I'll give you a quick background on it. The Senior Tax Work Program is an opportunity for seniors to work at minimum wage, contributing in some way to the town, and get money off their taxes. They cannot be cut a check. It's a credit against their taxes. The law started out at 125 hours at minimum wage, up to $1,000. And then when minimum wage started to move, we adopted the 125 hours at minimum wage and moved away from the $1,000 cap. Okay, some towns that stayed within the $1,000 cap just reduced the number of hours. So we afforded them the opportunity to go beyond that. When minimum wage hit $15 an hour, they actually changed the cap to $1,500 statewide. And we adopted, we went back to the 125, excuse me, let me back up. When it was at $12.50, I think, they went to $1,500. And then, so we adopted the $1,500. And then when they got, minimum wage went beyond that, we went back to the 125 hours so that people could get up to where they are now at $18.75. Well, now the state has changed the law again, allowing for up to $2,000. And so by rescinding the acceptance of the 125 hours, it affords people the opportunity to work 133 hours and get close to the 2,000. They could work 133 hours, 20 minutes, and I think 15 seconds or something, and get to 2,000, but for 133 hours, they can get to 1995. So it's an opportunity to afford people the opportunity to get a little bit more off their taxes. Unfortunately, they haven't changed it for the veteran side of this program yet, so the veterans will max out at 1875 still. And there is no age requirement for veterans. Veterans of any age can participate in this program.
Is there a way to just tie it to what the state maximum is versus
No.
having to like always
It would be
change
great,
and
right?
try and keep up with it?
It would be great, but the law is very specific, and it says that you cannot compensate them at more than minimum wage, and you cannot obviously compensate them at less than minimum wage, and it gives you choices. And so, yeah, you could do the 125 hours at minimum wage, or you can expand the number of hours they can work.
So the state doesn't set one, the state gives you a set of options and
Well,
you're
you can accept
electing for
different
the
local options,
highest.
right? The law in and of itself.
Yeah, they
the
don't
So
fault-
we do have
they
to
don't
pick
do
one
it in a
because
way
they
that
give
you
up.
could do
Right.
that
Right.
and not have to
Yeah, you
change the
can't change,
bylaws
you
every
can't follow it.
3 years.
Most people don't, to be honest. I mean, we're proactive in that we try to do whatever we can.
And these are paid out of the
Overlay.
so-called overlay?
Yep.
Okay. And I don't know, we have some new members here. Can you give a quick?
Sure. So every year, the Board of Assessors selects an amount to reserve, overlay reserve that covers abatements, exemptions, and other outstanding liabilities, okay? It's called the overlay. And that reserve amount can be released at the request of the town manager or evaluation of the Board of Assessors. When I started in this position, the overlay was $1 million a year. I reduced it again this year, trying to manage it where we do have some overlay reserve, maintaining that reserve versus minimizing the impact, right? You never want to go to zero because then you have that deficit. And I say it every year. At some point, that's going to go back up from, I think, 500 or 450 that I dropped it to this year. At some point, it's coming back. One of the things that we face here is when we have apartment buildings that are valued at $120 million, or office buildings at 80, those are big abatements, right, if you lose that one. And so you have to have reserves to cover those abatements. As we've expanded our exemption programs, it requires more in the overlay. I've tried to manage that so that none of these new exemption programs, the home rule petition or any others, is going to have an impact on the ongoing taxpayer by not having to raise it and continuing to be able to lower it.
Can you give us a ballpark number about how many seniors participate in that program?
I think we had 55 this year participants. There's 60 spots. So we have more than 60 applicants, I know, for this upcoming year. Some year people back out, some years they don't do a full 125 hours. We try to encourage and make it flexible so that people can do things that they want to do. You know, if they had a career in a certain field, I know there's someone who's an engineer that works in the engineering department. There are people that work in the schools. People sometimes make jokes about people sitting in the greeters downtown, but I will tell you, I always say first door on the left is where they go for directions otherwise, and that's my office. So it's very helpful. Not to mention the fact that they can help with other administrative things that we don't have staff to sit there and do. So it is very helpful.
Okay, does everybody have enough information to vote on that particular article now? That's Article 26.
26.
If you wanna make a motion.
Do you want to do public comments before more voting, or?
Well, let's check. Wilfred, do you have a public comment tonight? Mike? Nope, okay, so there are no.
Okay, just making
Oh,
sure.
Ed, you don't have a public comment, right?
All right.
So there are no public comments tonight, so
That's
let's keep
fine.
going. Thanks for reminding me.
McMahon, make a motion to recommend the town vote to amend the Mass General Law, Chapter 59, as written in the warrant, currently Article 26.
Okay, is 222, and who's going to second that?
Bradley, second.
Very good. Any further discussion? If not, Prashant, if you still can hear us?
Sure. Ahuja, yes.
Bradley, yes.
Brant, yes.
Clap, yes.
Dolan, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Shafford, yes?
So we have 800, 8 of us here. Okay, very good. There was one other piece of information that sort of Andrew got us. We already voted this article, but there was a discussion on the ambulance. And I have your notes here, where I don't know if you want to talk to it, or I can tell you what you told us.
The question was, I think, what are we looking at in the longer term? And,
Right.
and our 5-year plan right now, we just have this ambulance plus one in 2 years. But obviously, the hope for cadence with 4 ambulances and a 12-year average lifespan is to get one about every 3 years. But we're pulling things forward now because of the issues with turning around, like the vehicles.
And so I know John and when I spoke that they are going to pull some more money into ambulance reserve. At least the chief requested it. But again, that's going to take away revenue from this year. So it's a balance of, if we have this much free cash, it's probably not that horrendous to balance that and still throw in some free cash later versus, and having the positive effect in this year of having more revenue, which would reduce the tax rate. So not over saving.
So the question I think last time was, is the expectation that eventually that ambulance reserve builds back up to the point that they continue to purchase ambulances out of that reserve, and that this is sort of a one-time because of the supply chain? Or maybe it's looking like it might be 2 times now, still because
There's
of the supply
another
chain.
one
But really
coming
the
up
goal
in 2
is-
years, so.
But the goal really is to get back into that, these are funded entirely out of that reserve.
It could make sense. I think when you have all these different buckets and things, it makes things harder to understand somewhat.
Yeah.
But you can't, if you're going to want to buy an ambulance, but you aren't guaranteed that you'll have free cash in the year that you need it.
Right.
No, necessarily, right? So it does make sense to me, at least, to be saving something specific, because
Right.
that's something we definitely want to be able to buy.
Well, and this is the one where we were looking and they're sort of splitting the funding between that reserve and
Yeah.
free cash because the reserve didn't have enough funds. And so it was really just a question of, are we fixing that funding deficit? So that next time in 2 years, or maybe the one after that, they're to a point where they can make that purchase out of the reserve that's designed to cover those.
So what does it take for a department to be able to have a reserve? What, does the fire department have a reserve because they have specific revenue?
John?
John.
I think you have to.
That's what you get for not
You have
leaving.
to, I mean, it's like an enterprise fund or
it's
something,
a
right?
town
You have to,
meeting.
you have to come to town meeting.
Goes
and
with the
create one.
job, right? Yeah, it is somewhat. It's not necessarily tied specifically to them generating the revenue, because we have other capital reserves, but it's when you see a recurring need like that, you could set up a reserve so that when you need it, it's there. But yes, it would go to town meeting, be set up that way. But it's not tied
Okay.
directly to that revenue source. If suddenly we didn't have the ambulance receipts, we would still hopefully put money into the reserve, because that's what reserves are for.
But so anyone who identified a specific need, right, could in theory go to town meeting and ask to set up a reserve fund.
Although
To
we don't do
satisfy
it
the-
for police vehicles or
Well, so that's.
other, you know.
That was the
Well,
question,
so
that's the thing, so
It
anyone
might not
could, though.
directly be tied
Right.
to that revenue, but
It's one of those things, I think, and again, I don't know the specific mechanism, but in my mind, it's how frequent do you need them, and how big is the purchase? Because, with police cruisers, where it's sort of like an every year thing, and they're flowing in and out, the reserve doesn't necessarily make any sense because you're not
almost
building.
in the
If
You're
your
not
expenses
building
are
towards
already
anything.
level,
Right, you're not
because
accruing,
constantly
you're
buying.
just spending every
Right.
year. Yeah, yeah.
You
The
know, but
ladder
it's-
truck made sense because that's a over $1 million
Yeah,
thing that you buy every 20-something years.
Exactly, exactly. And, you know, having building reserves makes sense, you know, for a lot of cases where you would have roofs that you needed to repair and things like that. Those
think-
types of things in some communities.
When you're looking at how many roofs we're doing right now, and my big fear, well, I don't know if I'll be around, but 20 or 30 years
It'll
from now,
happen again, yeah.
it
When
seems
we
like
get 'em all
all the
again.
roofs are gonna come due
Yes.
again at the same time. And
Yes.
that's something that 10 years before that, you might wanna start.
Yeah, we talked about that.
I mean, like you and I talked about it, it's
Yeah.
too bad you can't come up with a way to make 3 of them last 5 more years or 10 more
Right.
years.
Can
so
we
that
get the
you can
lower
get 'em-
price option for a
Right.
couple of the roofs
Well, like
so that
what
they
they
need
did-
replaced
Yeah.
sooner? So
Well,
that
we have
can
an
do the
economic,
cycle?
we have an economic
Right.
life problem right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna perpetuate it by doing them all at the same
But
time.
right, I mean, that's when you would use the reserve fund, right? So I worked in an institution for years where that's how all of our capital projects were funded out of a fund that we contributed to annually, and you budgeted all of your projects, basically, right? And so if you knew all of our roofs are gonna be up in this 3-year period, the 3 years before that, this would be a large pool that we're just not paying for other things out of because we know these big expenses are coming. I mean, you're right, that would be the ideal
Hard to
solution.
start.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same as putting money in your savings account, right? There's things I want right now where I could be saving for a new roof on my house in 20 years. Well, rather have new shoes.
Braces,
Day.
college,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
lots of those things.
Okay, while we have some time, I would propose we vote Articles 28 and 29, which are general bylaws. One was the Finance Department, which allows the Finance Director not to necessarily be the town accountant. And the other one was the one that Fred Leonardo spoke to in that email I read earlier. So if you would at least make a motion, Gene, then we could discuss it.
McMahon, I make a motion to recommend the town vote to amend the bylaws as written in current Article 28 of the warrant. I'm sorry,
Specifically,
Articles
Article
7 of the
bylaws.
bylaws,
Yeah.
Finance
That
Department,
way at least we're
as written in Article 28 of the current warrant,
perfect.
version 4.
Clap second.
Very good. Any discussion? I think this all made sense. Okay, let's do a vote. Prashant?
Ahuja, yes.
Bradley, yes.
Brant, yes.
Clap yes.
Dolan, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Shepherd, yes?
And that's 800. Okay, similar. Current Article 29 in the warrant.
McMahon, I make a motion to recommend the town vote to amend Section 1 of Article 18 as currently written in the version 4 warrant, Article 29.
Clap second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, let's vote. Prashant?
Ahuja, yes.
Bradley, yes.
Brant, yes.
Clap yes.
Dolan, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Shepherd, yes?
It's 800. Okay, let's see if I can find anything else here that I wanted to do. That's good.
On Saturday.
I think I need more information on some of them. Oh, okay, one thing I wanted to kick around and discuss, and we have John here too, so that's useful. One article, which is currently Article 7, would be to refresh the AFC reserve. We've currently spent about 115,000 of the 250. And it would refresh out of free cash and revert to free cash if it wasn't used. That does give an option of not having to call a town meeting should there be something that comes up that requires that. I'm wondering what how people feel. I think putting some money back in makes sense to me, just because I don't think it causes much harm, and I think it is potential for value. Maybe 50K less than this might make sense. I mean, we're still haven't exceeded the snow and ice budget yet, but we don't know what March, I mean, it could snow, 10 times in March, and we'd certainly probably blow through it then pretty easily. But I'm interested in people's opinions.
I don't think it makes sense to put less in, because we're either gonna need it, in which case it makes sense to put it in, or we're not gonna need it, in which case it's gonna go back to free cash.
Right.
But
I mean, I
I
don't-
think it makes sense to put money.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That
And-
was the main question.
No, I do think
I
it makes
agree.
sense,
I
and I
think we
don't
just
think it makes sense to
replenish it.
reduce it.
Well, and I don't think you pick an arbitrary dollar amount, right? We have
Right.
sort of a standard dollar amount that is that fund.
Right.
We are early in the year to have spent the amount we have. Hopefully we spend no more, but it certainly
Yeah.
makes sense to allow it in case something comes up.
Okay, so, why don't we put a motion in and then we can discuss it if we'd like. But it's Article 7 and the number is 134677.
McMahon, I make a motion to recommend the town vote to transfer $134,677 from free cash to the Advisory Finance Committee Reserve Fund.
Clap second.
Okay, thank you very much. Any discussion? Yeah, okay. Prashant?
Ahuja, yes.
Bradley, yes?
Brandt, yes.
Clap yes.
Dolan, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Shafford, yes?
So that is 800. Thank you. I'm trying to think if there were others that I wanted to do, so just give me a second. DPW we're going to talk about. Space. Okay, that's all good. Okay, so one, I'm not sure how we'll get information, so I wanted to ask you about this, Rod, but there is going to be an article on the golf club building for a TBD amount. All right, will you be comfortable speaking on that to us in the future when that amount's known, or should we make an arrangement for someone else, or what do you think?
We have a meeting a week from today, so I should have an update then. And if I feel comfortable representing it, which I expect I will be, then
Okay,
if not,
Perfect.
then we can ask somebody else.
excellent. And I did want to point out to people, the acquisition of Zero Bowman, which is going to be out of, I believe, Walk-Up Robinson Trust money and some reimbursement grants from, I think, Sudbury Valley Trustees or something like that. There is going to be a public information public information meeting next Tuesday night, which sort of is exactly at the same time as the select board meeting, but it's across the street. But how are they going to do that? Because next week
Was
is
it
closed.
Monday or
Maybe I'm off by a day.
I think it's Monday.
Well, I hope it's not during our meeting.
I think it's earlier.
Maybe it's earlier.
It is February 27th,
27th is
Wednesday.
Wednesday. Okay, that's how it works. Okay, good.
No, it's not. I'm wrong.
It's
That's
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
It's
so it
Tuesday.
is.
Tuesday, February
During the select board
27th.
meeting?
Maybe it's earlier than the select board meeting? Because, oh, you know what it is? It's at the fire station. It's not across the street.
Oh.
7 p.m.
Okay.
Yep.
Which means that it'll also be broadcast on Westborough TV, I'm sure, so we'll be able to watch that and get a little more information as well, too. And to that end, we do have, let's see, people coming in. So, our next meeting Monday, where we're going to meet at Forbes, is going to have DPW attending. On Thursday, also at Forbes, we have Sustainable Westborough. We have town manager coming in. We probably convinced John maybe to come back, just because he likes us so much. And we have John Arnold giving an update on the town meeting on the 29th.
On the 4th, the Monday, we're going to be meeting here jointly with the Select Board and go through all the currently 14 citizen petitions with the proponents of those. Then on the 7th, we'll be back here and have a meeting with the schools. The 11th, we're meeting with Planning Department, and that's almost when we're going to be having to wrap things up on the 14th. And so that's why I'm starting to think of if there were any other groups we sort of needed. Part of the plan with the town manager coming in is to sort of hash through some of the budget questions people have, and then we can hopefully go through that. So I don't have any immediate other ones in mind that I think we were going to vote tonight. So I will next ask if there are any other liaison reports or information people want to share.
I don't know if you guys noticed, they do have the Hastings roof numbers in the new warrant, or the version 4 of the warrant, so we do have the Hastings roof number in.
Right, 3.758
Yeah.
million. And the Mill Pond, oh, because they had a number, they have the bid number for that, right? That's a hard number, I think. And then
I believe
Mill
so.
Pond and Hastings will get the number when Amber comes. Yeah. Okay. Did notice that. And there's some other articles that, next Tuesday, the warrant closes, so I think these articles will be filling in pretty quickly.
Perhaps some more citizen petitions.
Don't
One
ask
could
for
always
more,
hope.
please. I think we got plenty. We have plenty.
I did speak with Jennifer Miller regarding the article for Zero Bowman.
Yeah.
Andrew had some questions about. Jennifer called me back today. Andrew had specifically asked if there were any consequences if the acquisition of the property was not approved, namely risk of development and if anybody else is thinking about buying it, essentially. Jennifer didn't mention anything along those lines. Nobody has a 8-ball or, whatever, but crystal ball, but didn't see anything along those lines. Ongoing costs of maintenance, upkeep, such as bridges, paved paths, stairs, and whatnot. She did not have a specific estimate and wasn't aware of the expectation of having the estimate from a couple of years ago Andrew had alluded to. But she anticipates collaborating with the DPW for some miscellaneous parking concerns, as well as the Westborough Community Land Trust for majority, if not all, of the bog bridges, trail maps, trail blazes, that sort of stuff. One thing she did point out was that meeting ADA compliance and having feedback from the town on possibly getting some bathrooms at various locations throughout town, and specifically perhaps Zero Bowman. And Jennifer anticipates that some grants from the state could help defray some of the bathroom expenses. With all that said, I anticipate the presentation next Tuesday at the fire department could provide some more info.
Excellent. And my understanding is right now the scheme is essentially no cost to taxpayer unless you consider using Walkup Robinson trust funds.
That's
It's
the
not
biggest.
really a cost to the
That's the
taxpayer,
biggest
but
It's
your
punchline.
opportunity to do something or something else.
Could be
I
a
guess.
smart use of the funds if the.
So I have one question for everybody. There's an Article 31, which ironically amends Article 32 on the wetlands, that was spoken to by the Conservation Group. It's an extensive number of pages in the book. I have to go back and read it probably, so I'm not comfortable in voting it today, but I don't think we need more information from them, do we? 'Cause we
So I was just going to comment, so there is the Zero Bowman that they have the public meeting that
Yeah.
I'm sure that some of us want to attend. Beyond that, there's like the B-Wall easement, there's that bylaw, and the MBTA
Okay.
overlay, that all
So-
might be ones we
No,
want
the
to.
planning department is coming on March 11th, and they would talk
Oh,
to the BWAL easements.
I missed that we
and-
had planning, okay,
Yeah, I probably missaying it.
yep,
And they're
Okay.
going to talk about the overlay,
Perfect,
the
yep.
MBTA. So both those were covered on more information. I
Got it.
don't have conservation coming back because we did have them at the budget hearing.
right.
And I recall the thing not being very complicated, but I'd like to review it again before. I just voted on it at this point because I don't even remember what it said. So.
Well, I
But do
remember it
other
was
people
largely
want
just
more
a
information on that, or
simplification.
okay? I guess. Everybody else would be content reading it and coming up with their, okay. So why don't we, for next meeting, at least have looked at that, and if we do have a question, then we could arrange another question either through our liaison or.
So Article
or-
31,
It's
Current-
currently Article 31 is called amend general bylaws, which has to do with the wetlands, and we did cover it at the all-day
Yeah.
summit. So that's another thing. Okay, very good. We don't have any minutes. I did receive one, but I sent you guys so much material, I didn't want to send it out last. So we will review those minutes that I received at the next meeting, which is only on Monday, so they just come in so fast and furious. It's like a fire hose right now. Anybody have anything else? Otherwise, accept a motion to adjourn.
Shafford, motion to adjourn.
oh, look at that.
Sorry, Walter. I
Yeah.
just had a question on
Oh, okay.
the historic. Did they come back? Like, did you get a chance to talk to them
Oh,
about the
so,
downsizing on the? Yeah.
yeah, so I sent an email explaining what we voted. I did receive an email back asking if they cut the money in half, would we re-vote it? And my response was that, well, we would probably re-vote it because it's a significant change. And I can't speak for the committee, but generally from the conversation, I didn't think that half necessarily being 12,000 was probably a higher number than I think a lot of people were happy with. So, you know, because I think I heard numbers more like, you know, do 10 of them or do, you know, $3,000 or $5,000 and 12, but you know, I can't speak for all of you. But I would say if they change, so I explained to them, you can change it in the warrant, or someone could make a motion on the floor for a lower number, and we would re-vote it as well. I mean, re-voting it, but it doesn't mean that we would change our position on it, I guess, is the answer. And I haven't heard back, so I did reach out and let them know, and I let them know we unanimously supported the idea of giving them 30 days to make those decisions. And that it was the other one, we just thought it was you know, jumping from doing almost none of them to wanting to do 80 seemed like a big step for everybody here. So I don't know if they're going to come back or what their plans are, but we will, you know, we can even vote on town meeting floor if we want to re-vote it, if it's a different proposal. So, thanks for reminding me, I forgot about that.
Thanks, Walter.
We had a motion and a second. Do we have a second to adjourn?
Did we
I'll
approve
second.
minutes? I forget if we,
We don't
There are
have
no
any
minutes
right
to
now.
approve.
that's why we didn't approve any.
I have them. You haven't read them yet. I mean, I approve of them, but you
Yeah.
guys should all read them too.
Well, that's a good call. Let's read them. Let's read them, Tom, before we approve them.
So can I get a second on adjournment?
Clap second.
Okay. Prashant?
Oja, yes.
Bradley, yes?
Brandt, yes.
Clap yes.
Dolan, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Shafford, yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you, Westborough TV. Good night.